really what this talk's going to be about is Release to Hounds Part 3, History Repeating. And kind of the thrust of it is the fact that like we're at an inflection point. This is actually meant to be kind of a dual-pronged talk, talking about kind of the bug crowd backstory, the overall state of disclosure, some of the policy things that Trent kind of alluded at, and what y'all can do to actually be a part of helping solve that problem, because there's a lot that we can actually do. That's flipping me out on that side. Thank you for that. But then also just talking about, I think we're at an inflection point from an industry and from a just general value in what we do standpoint. And there's an opportunity for everyone who's got it in them to want to make a difference or change or start a thing, go off and do those things to actually do that. So it's partly intended to just say, hey, like this is how it worked for Bug Crowd. This is what kind of led us up to that. Go do likewise. And then to talk about some of the bits that Trent actually brought up, which was awesome. But yeah, I mean, huge thanks to all of the SAINTCON crew, especially to my homie Grifter, to Pope, to Mike, Matt, Chris. Thank you for your patience with the content piece of this. I'll get to that in a sec. This has just been actually, I won't cry at this part, but this has been this is actually the first time I've been back at a conference since I had open heart surgery. So while you guys are all in Vegas, I was under the knife. So thank you. Good to be back. So if I've seemed a little lower key than usual, that's why. And hopefully I have a bit of grace on that one. But to actually come back and come into such an incredible kind of community focused, thing that you guys have got here, which is no surprise given everyone who's involved in it. That's been a real treat for me as well. So props, I really appreciate it. So who the heck is this guy? My name's Casey. We've figured that part out, right? Been in security for 25 plus years. 25 is like the working in security number. I basically grew up a hacker. From a career arc standpoint, going through hacker to pen tester to solutions/sales, kind of trying to figure out that side of things. Then basically breaking bad and becoming a serial entrepreneur. And more recently, partly because of the health stuff, actually shifting into a role of investor advisor and working with Bug Crowd, obviously. Still driving my own projects and then working with other cybersecurity startups and entrepreneurs as well, because I just love that stuff. Basically, I've been in offensive security for my entire career. A lot of exposure to some of the problems that Trent talked about, prior to having the light bulb moment for Bug Crowd, but also coming up in the community that I kind of became a hacker in, or realized I was a hacker in, which is Down Under, just in case you didn't pick the accent or the inflection. Seeing that kind of happen, that's just been a phenomenal ride. So that's kind of where that's all at. And we've done that. So yeah, like I said, in terms of what was driving as a founder to kick Bug Crowd off. This is dropping out a bit. The motivations are really threefold. I think one of them Trent really touched on heavily, because it's not a solved problem yet. I think part of one progress that we've made no means done. The whole idea of basically changing the operating environment for people that hack in good faith so that it's legal, which is a lot of what we've been doing over the last 10 years. I think the next 10 is, part of that is making it consistently rewarded, but also continuing work on the legal kind of acceptance side of things. Bug Crowd was really about creating a market that could kind of balance the economics between attack and defense. Because if you get this big crowd of adversaries that have lots of different reasons to do their thing, and you're trying to beat that with automation or with someone being paid by the hour, it doesn't really matter how good that person is. They're going to fail eventually because of the math. So in the meantime, if you've got this incredible security research and hacker community around, why not try to find? And that was the brain bug that I had that led to starting Bug Crowd. And just in general, like enabling the pursuit of potential. I think for me, I do things because I think I can. I think that's a big part of the hacker mindset, the hacker spirit. It's like, I think I could probably do this differently. Like now I need to find out. So drawing that out of folk, building things that actually create that's a big part of what motivates me personally. But again, we started Bug Crowd. There's some really interesting phenomena happening in the market right now that are very similar to what it looked like when we kicked off. And I wanted to tuck into those a little bit. But before we get into that, I need to breathe for a sec. Just give me a moment. It's cool. It's just like, pacing. shouldn't say it like that because everyone freaks out. We've got a signal, it's fine. So the title of the talk, in the really early days of BugCrowd, basically when it was, a WordPress site and a bunch of forms, kind of janky pre-funding startup stuff. Every time we'd launch a new program, we'd say release the Hounds. We'd kind of tweet that out because almost invariably there'd be this bum rush of vulnerabilities that folks that we were working with would kind of receive at that point. And it was funny, frankly. We learned how to do it better over time, but it was one of those things where it's like release the Hounds. So that's the go there. So who's the founder in this room or kind of wants to be? Who's got the kind of the cyber entrepreneur thing going on? We got one brave hand, two. All right, come on, for real. Let's ask again. There we go. Cool. Don't sell yourself short on that. Like I get the fluffy kind of version of founder because of how noisy BugCrowd's been. But I think everyone who's doing something that's new, if you're breaking new ground, you're a founder, like own it. It's cool. Bug hunter in here or does like vulnerability research. Who saw Trent's talk earlier? Here to yell. It's awesome. And who's running a bug bounty program or a VDP kind of in the group? Yeah, sweet. Awesome.
Sweet. You hold it closer to your mouth.
Got it. I couldn't.
And down it.
Hello. We online? Beautiful. Where was I? Yeah, okay. So this is going back to the origin pieces. So this is kind of the other thing with the title of this talk is part one was a version of it that I gave at Ruxmon at Google in Sydney in 2013 on the 1st of March. So that was just before we first came out to the US. We'd just gotten into an accelerator program. We'd gotten our like ramen noodle money to do that and kind of keep the lights on and focus up and all those things. And really what we'd done was focused on just proving out, like, is the crowd available? Are hackers willing to come in and actually do this stuff if we encourage them? What does that look like? Does it, burn things down on the other side? Like, how does this whole thing work? And these were some of the observations, even at that point. They've held up pretty well. It's working mostly, still a lot to learn. I think that's true. If you're talking about crowdsourcing just in general, what BugCrowd's gone on to do is to basically look at kind of what I called out before around, all of the creativity in the white hat community being a balancing force to the bad guys and looking at all of the different ways that we can apply that, which is kind of, what I set out to do in the first place. But bug bounty is a really key expression of that. It's the one that everyone understood at the time. There's some other really fun ones in here as well. I'll put these slides up later so you can have a look at it, but it's kind of comical going back and seeing, some of the stuff, some of the kind of problems that Trent was talking about, and even some of the folks that we talk to even today as customers or folks that run their own programs. There are issues that are just inherent to the fact that crowdsourcing is really powerful, but it's kind of noisy. And there's all sorts of different things that you have to manage in the process. There was one in here, where'd it go? Clickjacking, I think, was the one that's funny because you still get those. You get people that show up and say, oh, look, I'm super enthusiastic about just finding a bug and reporting it or even getting money for it, whatever their motivation might be. But they're getting like an 11 out of 10 for enthusiasm and maybe a 3 or a 4 for actually being useful. So we try to train them and make them better at what they do. Meanwhile, this is what the office looked like. So by the way, that's you'll see it in a second. So this is where kind of it all kicked off. This is the second photo is actually when we first landed in SF. That's my co-founder, Serge. And this is the platform. This was literally I think it was a Kickoff Labs sign-up page, and it was ghetto. It was janky. Like we just ran whatever we needed to see if this was even possible in the first place, right? And the thing that was interesting about that was like we kind of knew that it would work. We knew that if you get a broader group of people and incentivize them to compete to find vulnerabilities, you're going to get more criticality, you're going to get more issues because that's just the way that the bad guys do it, right? So we kind of knew that part would work. A big part of it was, would the market accept this? Because at that point in time, hackers were just default criminal. This idea was ridiculous. Like today, it still raises eyebrows with people, but I think it's broadly accepted that hackers can actually be a part of the solution. They aren't inherently part of the problem. It wasn't true back then. So we're testing that. First program on WordPress. And yeah, this is kind of reflecting how the vibe of, the industry just in general at the time felt, right? Real good times. Because I do think that, the professionalization of security and even bringing hackers into the defensive solution space to be a part of that solution, I think that's created incredible opportunity for us. It's helped us actually jump in to be a part of solving problems, all that kind of stuff. But I do miss the days of just doing it for the lulz occasionally. I don't know if anyone else is in the room that can relate to that. I've heard it a few times at the con so far. So going back to where it was all up to at that point in time, one of the things that happened when we first landed in the US was I actually caught a lift at one point. I had a Sudanese driver who was an immigrant who'd fled civil war over there. And it was really interesting listening to his perspectives on security in general. He trotted out this amazing line, like all security is the product of something bad happening. I'm like, that's a really pessimistic but pragmatic way of kind of, summing up the problem that we've got to work with and the things that we've got, available to us to actually work with to do better and to actually, try to make things safer, try to make the internet a safer place, as Trent mentioned before. So that was the same month that this happened. And for those, like, how many of you in the room were actually operating in information security or old enough to actually remember when we called it InfoSec? Yeah. All right, cool. So my point of view, which is obviously Australia centric through that period of time, it's that security wasn't really something that people cared about yet. Like in terms of the broad population, right? It was zealots, even inside organizations. There wasn't necessarily the ability to get buy-in and actually talk about this as a thing that matters. It's not just a thing that we want to do. It's a thing that matters for the safety of the user. It's a thing that matters for the safety of the shareholder and for everyone else who's involved. To me, when the Snowden disclosures happened and some of the things happened around how hacking was ostensibly being used internet-wide, what that did, not to speak to the morals of that particular action, but I think one of the byproducts that it had was that it got everyone thinking about this at the same time. I don't think that had ever happened before. So all of a sudden, as a technical internet user, hacking happens to me. Followed by, this is the following year, is the Target breach, the year of the retail breach. So now hacking happens was Snowden. This is hacking happens to me. Because I think 60% of the US population got their credit card replaced that year. That's cool. You can insure against that. Then this happens. Harder to insure against. I think there was obviously Ashley Madison was huge for obviously the people that were involved in it, but even just this idea that your personal details, your personal data, things that you can't get back through an insurance company if they get stolen, like this stuff is now being targeted by criminals, by threat actors. OPM was that year as well. So there was definitely a theme. And then of course, 2016 brings us to hacking is happening to my country. I think between 2017 and 2020, there was just really an explosion of software. And what that drove, I think, was this kind of explosion of creativity and application of creativity on the TA side to take advantage of all of that. The whole idea of Docker coming out, for example, and it being so easy to configure Docker and push containers out that everyone forgot about the fact that like a publicly routable network works like a network, and it was shooting fish in a barrel again all of a sudden. So software is eating the world and the bad guys are eating the software, right? So you've got this sort of scene that bubbles up over time, and people were aware of that. This is the thing, is that at that point in time, I think through this period, cybersecurity, hacking, what we do became dinner table conversation. Then COVID hits. My employee's 5-year-old is responsible for my corporate attack surface. 2021 was the year of the supply chain attacks, so Log4j, even the ship. And shout out to the Web3 folk in the room if there's any, but I was quite proud of that meme when I made it at the time. But a big part of really what I think 2021 showed us is that the internet is kind of we knew it. It showed everyone else. It started to kind of expose this thought that the internet's basically just a large pile of turtles, right? We know that, but all of a sudden it became clear and obvious that we need to do something about not just the parts of, the infrastructure that we're touching as users or trying to legislate around. We actually need to do a lot about the plumbing as well, because that's probably been neglected along the way. Then this happens, Colonial Pipeline attack. Okay, now everything's a large pile of turtles. And 2023 basically pointed out that the machines are coming for our pile of turtles. And in 2024, our turtles have learned how to self-replicate. So that's where we are right now, right? And as I said, talking through that story arc, really what what to me was happening at the time was the fact that, an industry, a problem set, something that's actually really important and has, real material impact potentially to individual voters, individual consumers, like your average you think grandma, grandpa, you kids, all those different people that you know and love, they became more aware of this over that period of time. And this is kind of what drove that. And the thing is that if it's repeated enough at the dinner table, it ends up in the boardroom. With the supply chain stuff, for example, all of a sudden there's an executive order coming out around supply chain security. Same thing happened with the AI piece. When ChatGPT drops, that was less of a response to security and more just a panic around how potentially transformative that tech was. So we ended up working with the White House and the ONCD to write the EO and some of the national cyber strategy stuff around that. It's because they realized that there is risk involved in tech in a way that they didn't when I think a lot of us first kicked off. And it doesn't just make its way to the dinner table, it makes its way up into Congress, into the White House, as I mentioned, into DOJ, the Pentagon, the Election Advisory Committee. I think one of the things that Trent was talking about was how do we actually encourage and introduce legislation and changes in legislation. And I think that's going to become more relevant as we go forward. A big part of what we've been working on through Disclosure over the past 12 years now is the idea of how do we make hacking legal in the first place? Because if you're operating in good faith, I think the starting point for bug bounty wasn't so much will I get paid, it's will I get my door kicked in? And the chilling effect that created for all that period of time, I think at this point in time is starting to lift off. You still see a lot of these kind of state law issues and companies that still want to kind of lawyer up as a way to chill and see their way out of the problem, but it's becoming less of a thing that they're able to do at this point, which is, I think, a good thing. Even with election security, something that we got to work on in 2020 was constructing a boilerplate vulnerability disclosure policy that ended up getting adopted by CISA and pushed out to all of the election officials ahead of that election, because we knew that there are cybersecurity issues that need to be addressed. But the bigger thing, and again, going a little bit to some of Trent's questions around, how do we make sure this stuff gets fixed? Transparency is really important. Secrecy ultimately is fragile. That's a computer science concept that I think translates to a lot of other things as well. And transparency is inherently anti-fragile if you can get to that place. So how do you encourage people to get to that place through the carrot? And then how do you actually kind of regulate where you can to introduce the stick as well? So what was BugCrowd up to? This is just a quick nostalgia reel. It's our first office in SF. That was very cool. Just sort of being in the middle of doing the startup thing and actually getting moving on that and actually being able to work on these things. And again, for the entrepreneurs or the folks that are wanting to do this and wanting to grow, this is kind of a part of what those fun parts in the very, very early days looked like. Second office, the third one that we had in San Francisco before COVID and everyone stopped coming to work. And just recently we've opened an office in New Hampshire, and that's where we're at now. So just quick stats of where we're up to, and also we're hiring, obligatory call out there. I think for the folks that raised their hand earlier on the founder and entrepreneurial side of things, the other part of this is that, when you do take on some of these problems and actually have this irrationally pissed off approach to try to get them solved, you get to do some pretty incredible stuff. I mean, aside from doing it in and of itself, this whole idea of having the opportunity to influence legislation and help it be done better in North America, in Australia, in the UK, we got to actually drive and advocate for that. And now that's kind of a normal thing. You know, anyone who's interested in doing that type of thing, you can get involved in stuff like Disclose.io, like Hackers on the Hill, like some of these other programs where legislators do want to talk to us and we want to talk to them. The ones of us that do actually want to help be a part of helping that get done better, the door is open for that stuff. So that's pretty cool. You know, getting to advocate for women in tech, getting to, you know, basically bring people out of, like connect folk in parts of the world that don't have or didn't have an opportunity to actually contribute to this and plugging them into that. There's all these sort of fun bits and pieces that we get to do. Plus, you get to do some silly shit too, which is fun. We get to keep doing that. I think that kind of hacker spirit of like, let's have fun as we do this stuff. Yeah, you get to do that. And don't, it's a long story. Come ask Grifter later, whatever. Yeah, there is, but I didn't have time for that. All right, so we'll switch into Broke vs. Woke, and then I'm going to blast through this and get to whatever Q&A you guys want to get to. We all good so far? It's good. Rock and roll. I'm not falling over, which is a bonus. All right, so in terms of like how the industry's progressed, you know, AI is really interesting because I think for people in security, our introduction to AI was like 2015 when it got funded like crazy and marketed like crazy, and none of it was realistic. A lot of the narrative was around like, how are we going to replace humans fully with AI? And it kind of pissed us off because that solution was never going to work, and like they weren't actually taking our advice seriously in the first place. So there was a bit of a, you know, got off on a bad foot, I think, with security at that point in time. I think that's still true today in terms of AI not replacing human creativity. It's a lever, not a tool. But this whole idea of like rub some blockchain or some automation or some machine learning or AI on, you know, your security problem, it will magically go away. Like I think everyone at this point has seen that that's not how this works. I think owning that's probably a pretty good thing. Like cybersecurity is a people problem. Technology just makes it go faster, right? The adversary does it like that. We should do that too. We should think about it in that way. Second, a more perfect security solution is a better security solution. So this is for the folks that are trying to think of new ideas, disrupt, do all those kind of things. I think there is a tendency to try to solve the problem to 100%. I don't necessarily think that's always possible. I don't think it's really ever possible when you think about it at a system level, because even if we do achieve that, the bad guys just innovate past it, right? So how do you make a better security solution than the ones that exist today? To me, that's about making secure easy. Like, how do you make it easy for the people that you're working with to do the right thing that's going to be more secure for them and for their users, and to make insecure choices more obvious? So thinking about it as a design and a marketing problem, as well as obviously a technical one. That's a soapbox that I am happy to get back up on at another time when I've got more energy. One piece here is bug bounty payouts is a vanity metric. So Trent brought this up. I do think it's important for companies that are doing the bug bounty thing to basically celebrate that. Partly because it's encouraging the hackers to participate. It's rewarding and celebrating the hackers that have participated. To me, part of what it does as well is it kind of furthers this narrative that hackers are a part of the solution, not just a part of the problem. To me, that's actually a really important part there. But, you know, as Trent mentioned, the unintended consequences, you can kind of dust your hands off and say kind of job done at that point. I don't think that's the right way to do it. Yeah, to me, a more rational way of approaching bug pricing is to look at it as, you know, what is the required payout? How much do I need to offer to the market in order to get a P1 on this system? Because if it's $10,000 and I'm not getting any hits on that, and then I bump it up to 20,000 and I do, then all of a sudden I've figured out kind of a proxy metric of the overall cost to attack the company, which to me is a lot of what we're here to do, full stop, is to raise that price, right? Thinking about it in that way is just, some people do it. I think the really thoughtful organizations that have taken this type of model on, you know, we do it, we help folk do that. But I think just in general, it's a good way to think about a lot of different things in security, because if you can attach a price to it, then all of a sudden the business understands what's going on and you can have like a productive and a rational conversation. Vulnerable disclosure programs is a virtue signal as the broke version of that. So, hey, look at me, I've just started a bug bounty or a VDP. I think marketing this stuff is actually still kind of a good thing to do because enough people understand it that you can actually use it to create more trust. You can attract hackers, all that kind of stuff. If that's all you're doing it wrong. So if you're actually fixing things when they come in, all that kind of stuff, that's when you're starting to do it better. But to me, the better way to think about it overall is really, we're not going to vulnerabilities are a product of the fact that humans are imperfect. We're creative and we're powerful, but we screw up sometimes. And then we use computers to magnify that mistake or that awesomeness, right? For as long as we're involved in doing that, there's going to be bugs. And some of those bugs are going to have benefits. And yeah, here we are. So the whole idea of using basically the admission that it signals that like we're going to have vulnerabilities no matter how hard we try to prevent them to your entire organization. What that switches you into is this posture of humility where you can actually have open, productive conversations within the org around how you're going to get better at it, not do the whole like ostrich risk management kind of try to deny it away thing. Assurance we get from pen testing is sufficient. So this whole idea of just, I've been through a checklist, we're good. I have a lot of feelings and thoughts on this one, just in general, because I think we're at a point where the pressure on actually demonstrating why we do what we do is increasing pretty rapidly at this point. But it's still something that gets asked of us. So to me, like the solution is assurance and a focus on impact. If you can go through and say, cool, we've checked all the boxes that we need to check, but what we've also done is basically gone in as hard as we can to replicate the kind of risks or the kind of impacts that a legitimate threat actor could actually deliver. Red teaming, bug bounty, there's all sorts of different ways to achieve that. But I do think this whole idea of like, we've checked the boxes, we're good to go. That's something that needs to hopefully die in a fire at some point. And yeah, again, for the entrepreneurs and the innovators, like, the broke mindset is the big players have cybersecurity innovation sewn up. Like there's no room for me to do a thing. I could never impact this or influence this. I did. I'm not that smart, right? I think the thing is that the community that you've got around you, that's ultimately where you're going to get the answers from, and being able to bounce off your peers. Like, I've got this wild idea. Like, what do you think about it? And then working out who can do what, you start to get a feel for how you're going to put your crew together. Part of what I wanted to do with Bugcrowd was take that general phenomena that exists in our community and find ways to plug it into all sorts of different problems. And even now in kind of more of an advising role there, that's still something that I think about outside of Bugcrowd as well as a general thing that's really powerful. It's really important. I think this conference already understands that and takes advantage of it. So yeah, don't let the big fellas or the big players scare you off. And the last bit here is, who's submitted a vulnerability just to have a go off into a black hole? We heard about a few before, but right, it's still a thing. Unfortunately, 2024, it's still a thing. In terms of ways to encourage, another solution, I think, to some of the problems that Trent was calling out in his talk earlier around just like the variability in response that you get is actually normalizing vulnerability disclosure as a thing that everyone just should do. And as I mentioned before, some of that comes from top-down regulatory change, like the whole thing with changing the charging rules on CFAA. That happened in February of 2023. We've been pushing the DOJ for that for 8 years. So it was a combination of talking to them, finding the right people, educating them on the problems and what needed to happen, finding allies, building all of that stuff up, but then using stuff like Disclose.io to make it easy enough for everyone to adopt and safe enough for hackers to actually accept that you create this sort of pincer move on what's happening in the market. So yeah, really what the Disclose.io project is about is all of those different things that I just mentioned. Like, how do you make adopting a vulnerability disclosure program with safe harbor that protects the security researcher in a way that the company proactively puts on their website. So you know as a hacker before you submit a bug, how you're going to be treated. How do you make acceptance and adoption of that as easy as possible? Part of the challenge with even that part is that, when lawyers get introduced to this idea for the first time, they freak out because they've never seen it before. The whole idea of I've been trying to keep hackers and people that want to do the wrong things with my systems and IP away from the company for so long. Now you're asking me to invite them in. That doesn't make sense. The unfortunate thing is that a nervous lawyer is a verbose lawyer, which is their job. But if you're a hacker on the other side who's not a lawyer or maybe even doesn't speak English as a first language, you end up in a position where you can be actually committing crimes without realizing or intending to do that. So that was one of the big things that changed with CFAA. It's basically, if you're operating in good faith, they now have to prove good faith before they can put together a federal felony case. And obviously, not a lawyer. If I was, I'm not your lawyer. So if that's relevant to you, then you should speak to someone like that. But this is the kind of stuff that we all get the opportunity to actually influence and change as a community. Other pieces, the threats database as well. I think that's something that this is all not-for-profit, open source. Jump on if you want to contribute and help out with it. But there's literally a list of all of the different threats. It's basically a carry-on from attrition.org and some of the work that Jericho did back in the day because he kind of stepped back from that. So we decided to try to pick it up. And yeah, the threats piece is wild when you go and look at what's still happening. There's a lot of pretty gnarly stuff going on. Basically where these kind of legislative and tort law mechanisms are being used to suppress, security research. The problem with it fundamentally for me, aside from getting annoyed because it's my hacker fam in a sense who's getting kind of kiboshed by this stuff, the only people that listen to those laws are the good guys. So if they're being used as a control, you are doing it wrong. So how do we have these things modified to reflect the fact that we're actually here trying to help and continue to have that adopted? I think that's a really good thing for folk to get involved in pushing if you can. So how's that idea coming along? In summary, yeah. So I appreciate the everyone kind of coming in and doing the afternoon thing here, and appreciate the kind of return to speaking thing as well. It's actually been quite cool to just hang out. I'm going to be around to catch up afterwards as well. I've got stickers and swag and all those different things, and open for questions as well because I know some of the combos that happen with Trent. I'd love to dive into some of those too. But in summary, hackers have a seat at almost every table now. We have the option to use this. I know that our day jobs are hard and some of the things that we do feel like a grind, but when it comes to actually trying to push this whole thing forward for a safer internet, for our ability to be more effective at that, for all those different things, I think people are listening, and it's good for everyone to know that. Good things happen when you step out. My story with Bugcrowd is an example of that. There are lots of other examples of that around. But I did want to try to tie that narrative back in with some of the things that I think have happened and that we've been able to help contribute to catalyzing at a macro level as well, because the work's not done. We are by no means done. I think the shift to people being open to the idea of accepting help to hackers, that was a big boat to turn around. And I do feel like a lot of that work is approaching the point where we can say, yeah, that's done. But in terms of standardizing that and having people actually lean into that instead of just being open to the idea, that's the next part, I think. And there's urgency, there's a window of opportunity, and you're in a willing community of people that just want to think about cool stuff and ways to transform what's the status quo to make it better as you go forward. So use that because you're all here. The innovation's all around you. Sorry, that sounded very Silicon Valley, but you get what I mean. Henceforth and be rad. That's it. Peace.
Next.
Any questions?
Happy your process with working with
Yeah, definitely. EFF. So yeah, sure. So Mike was asking, in the process of working with hackers to do we work, like the royal we, I guess, in this sense, work with the EFF and others. Yeah, there's a bunch of organizations like that around now. EFF's obviously, they're kind of well known. They've been doing this for a long time. You've got the Hacking Policy Council and the Security Research and Defense Fund, which has just kind of popped up over the past, I think, 2 years. So we're a founding member of that. Really, like those folk are best for education and for jumping in when you need help, because all of a sudden you found yourself in a position as a hacker where, you need a lawyer and you don't know who to ask or how to get one. They're really handy for that type of thing. But I think in terms of policy influence, there's Hackers on the Hill, which I mentioned before, and that's literally just a bunch of people going to Capitol Hill, and talking with policymakers, with staffers, with Congress people. You get kind of a boot camp on how to have those conversations and what they're interested in. But then in reality, you just kind of get walked up into different offices and get to talk about, the aspect of cybersecurity that's the thing that you're most passionate about. You get paired up with the staffer or the policymaker that's working on those type of things. And it's awesome because the thing is, if we don't show up, it's not their fault because they're better at policy than we are. But they can tend to write stuff that's kind of dumb from a tech standpoint because we're better at tech than they are. So that whole opportunity, taking advantage of that, I think is a really good thing. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, the Amazon, the consumer goes now at market their products skills for just get that people. Was it mainly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So he asked, do I see opportunities around hackers being able to market their skills B2C as opposed to B2B? So business to consumer, directly to the user, as opposed to the business itself. It's one of the reasons, honestly, I did a marketplace with BugCrowd, because I wanted to do both. This whole idea that like being able to address the hacker and the supply side of things, but then influence the people that ultimately need to adopt this, right? That was kind of how I thought about it. I do think generally with B2C, users are kind of the final frontier, right? Because ultimately a lot of the overall budget and the overall care in terms of action ends up in companies that build security products or build products that need to be secure or need to be seen to be secure. So that's where the bulk of the industry attention goes. And small business and users miss out. So I do think a thing there, I mean, even like, listening to some of the incredible content creators like Jack's talk the other day, and some of the other folk around, like I see those kind of things as in some ways a B2C business, because what they're doing is getting out there and educating a broader audience that's not just us inside our echo chamber on what the hell's actually going on, and how can they actually think about that and start to make decisions that make them more secure. That's a huge gap. Like there's a lot of different things. I do think, opportunities to help out with education, for example, like everyone who's basically below the security poverty line. I think that's an opportunity for hackers to jump in. And I think B2C opportunities will kind of pop out of that. That's a system level answer, but hopefully that helps. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, you let me know.
If we're up on the government, they're getting using that like learning.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to rephrase that question. So you're saying if we have governments jumping in and thinking about accepting and kind of sitting in the middle of security research, how do we make sure that they don't weaponize that and use it for offense? Is that kind of roughly it? Yeah, you don't. That's the short story. I think the way to get involved in actually having an opinion on how that works is to, again, operate through policy or operate through those agencies directly and actually contribute to vulnerability equities programs. Because that's what happens when a vulnerability comes into someone who might have also an offensive charter alongside a defensive one, there's a process where they decide, is it in the public's best interest? Is it more towards the public's best interest for us to hold on to this thing so that we can use it for surveillance or for whatever it is they might need to get done? Or is it better if we push it through? That's in reality how it works. So there is a challenge to that. If you're morally uncomfortable with that, totally understand. There's all sorts of different kind of sets of thinking around that whole thing, but that's how it works. So yeah, that to me would be the answer to that is understand how VEPs work. That's VEP, Vulnerability Equities Process, not VDP, Vulnerability Disclosure Program. Sorry, acronyming myself into a corner here. And yeah, influence them wherever you can, like have conversations about that. I think that's the whole idea of vulnerability research for offensive use, actual offense, as opposed to offense for the purpose of defense. I think that's a lot easier to have as a conversation today than it was, even in 2020. Like you think about when it came out that Azimuth was involved in the San Bernardino piece, that stayed secret for 5 years before it came out, because at the time it wasn't something that would have been a good thing to talk about openly. But so much happened between when that actually went down and when it was revealed to be Mark & Co. that it was celebrated. They were like an Australian startup success story at that point. So I think the opinion and the understanding of the fact that surveillance and those sorts of things are still necessary functions, we've just got to figure out the inconvenience of that in how we think about these sort of broader issues. Those are conversations that you can have in public now in a way that you couldn't before. So joining in on that, I think, is probably the best way to do it. Anyone else? We'll wrap it up. Alrighty, cool. Thank you.